You're listening to The Hidden Chasm, where we explore unforeseen growth challenges that surprise SaaS enterprise. The Hidden Chasm is brought to you by United FX Inc. in partnership with Blue Nilla LLC. For more information on either, visit unitedfx.com or bluenilla.com, respectively. All right, let's kick this thing off. Josh, it has been an interesting year for us. We sort of embarked on this journey to figure out what is this thing that we keep seeing all over the place. We are watching these companies, they've been around for 10, 20 years, hitting all of these, going along, everything is fine, making money, and all of a sudden they slam into this wall. Retention numbers go down, dev estimates are a year long, sales aren't what they should be, and competition's coming in and eating their lunch. We gave it a name. We called it The Hidden Chasm, and we started thinking through, all right, well, what are all the perspectives? And we chatted with, who'd we chat with? Product, tech, M&A. We chatted with human resource and people and culture. We chatted with sales. What was your favorite conversation, Josh?
My favorite conversation?
On the spot. Here we go.
I can't pick and choose.
Yeah, the one that popped out to you.
No, I appreciated, well, so me personally, I appreciate the human ones about the relationships and the dynamics between people that impact a lot of this. The stuff that's so fuzzy sometimes, it gets ignored or disregarded when you're looking at the executive level view of the health of the company. I love any conversation where it's what part of our humanity do we ignore for the sake of having everything organized in a perfect grid, and how that ends up causing long-term harm. Those to me are fascinating conversations. The dissonance between our desire for order and our natural human messiness.
Okay. No, I think I like that. It'll be fascinating to see how our guest speaks to that today. I'm really excited because today we've got Garth, and we'll do a formal intro in a second here. But I think, Garth, you're going to give us a different perspective, because instead of speaking to all of these problems we've seen, Garth has really dedicated himself to one of the tools that I think can be used to sort of climb out of what we've been calling the hidden chasm, or certainly start addressing some of those problems. But without further ado, today we are very excited to introduce Garth Reid, an accomplished executive with over 20 years of experience across industries like SaaS and healthcare. Before embarking on his journey as an EOS implementer, Garth was focused on operational excellence and growth, among other things. At one point between 2021 and 2023, achieving recognition for the 13th fastest growing company in the Philadelphia area, a COO for Ethos Treatment. Since then, Garth has embarked on an entrepreneurial adventure of his own, building his business as a professional EOS implementer, where he helps companies streamline operations and align teams for long-term success. Welcome, Garth.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me on today.
Party on, man.
No, thanks for being here.
Party on.
There it is.
There it is.
All of 1 minute.
It's fair game at this point,
Well, we're going to get into EOS and all of those things. But before, and I'm really interested in the intersection about what we've been chatting about and EOS as well. I think when Garth and I chatted a little while back, I was surprised how much overlap there was and the tools that Garth was bringing to that conversation. But before we get into any of that, Garth, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, how you got into the work that you do, your background.
Sure. Do you want the 90-second version, the 10-minute version? You'll come to realize I do love the sound of my own voice. So sometimes brevity.
Give any version you like.
Right,
you can always
exactly.
Edit it.
Brevity isn't always my specialty. Born and raised in central western Pennsylvania. And even as a kid was always kind of entrepreneurial, right? Just was always working, wanted to work, right? I mean, first lawn cutting business at age 11, having my own business waxing skis and snowboards, in high school.
Right.
As I like to say, maybe or maybe not selling some bootleg t-shirts in freshman college dorms. I'm not sure the statute of limitations up in upstate New York, but just always kind of hustling, and then moved to Philadelphia 22 years ago, right after college, and As you mentioned, ended up working in the healthcare world, worked in the insurance industry. But even in quote unquote corporate America, always kind of had some type of side hustle. I did an LLC doing private concierge level technology consulting, really focusing on bringing technology to aging baby boomers. So I've always been kind of a tech guy and always had this belief that technology can really enrich people's lives, especially our aging population. There's just kind of a fear and a barrier to adoption, right? And I saw it with my mother getting grandkids that live 400 miles away from her, right? And once we got my mother over the fear of, at this time it was just Skype, right? Getting over the fear of that technology, how much that enriched her life, right? And so there's a period of time where I was kind of doing that as a side hustle, helping other folks, just kind of in the private, technology consulting type stuff. And then through a series of events that we'll probably get to later in my early 30s, I had the opportunity to start mentoring and kind of coaching young men recovering from drug and alcohol addiction. And through a series of events that eventually led me to the last job you mentioned is the COO at EOS Treatment, which was a phenomenal drug and alcohol, and now actually drug and alcohol and mental health outpatient provider here in the Philadelphia region. And that's where we implemented EOS there and just had tremendous success. I do want to make sure I say, EOS was a big part of that success, but it would be naive for me to not say that the critical part to the success of that company is the quality of the clinicians and the therapeutic services that they're offering, right? So it's not just the system that I'm kind of working with now; it's the parts that are within that system. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got to where I'm at today.
It's even without like the extra pieces you mentioned. The side hustles and all of those things. You've done a lot of different things to get to where you are. And I'm curious, like, how has that all sort of come together to your worldview and to how you approach what you're doing today?
Sure. So as long as I can remember, I take actual pleasure in like making things work better, like finding efficiencies, right? Even if it's like finding a shortcut driving my son to school. We've actually figured out on our drive, I have a 5-year-old, and so we have about a 15 to 25-minute commute, right? And in figuring out that we can actually go a little bit longer mileage wise, and it saves us a few minutes, right? And like that just kind of excites me in finding those efficiencies. And that's just been a part of me my whole life. Throughout my career, I've worked at small companies where I've experienced grave inefficiencies because of how small they are. But while working at these small companies, we've had clients who were Fortune 100 companies and marveled at the inefficiencies they have on the opposite end of the scale, right? You can see how people can be very inefficient because they only have 3 people doing this. And we can see how people can be very inefficient because they have 30 people doing this when we probably need 8 people, right? And so I worked for a technology company in my late 20s, kind of on the beginning end of doing a lot of like mobile phone capture and GPS tracking for field service workers. And that was an example. I had a major garbage company, waste disposal company as a client. And it was cool to see them being able to adopt some of this new stuff, but the slow pace it took for them to get approval, the 14 layers of people. It's like, listen, we got a good idea. We got a proof of concept. Let's do this. Right. And you actually have the resources to probably roll this out properly. Right. Versus a smaller company. Like, yeah, I'd love to do that, but who has time to do that? We're just trying to keep the lights on, So seeing that at different companies. And then when I first learned about EOS, working at a local SaaS technology company here in Philadelphia, that's where I was first introduced to it. A great company by the name of Clutch. Realize that that's kind of at the heart of what this does, right? It's finding that efficiency, which a lot of times is, I think a lot of times we think we have to, the more complicated things are, like the better they are. And I don't agree with that, right? Like it's, the simpler you can make something, typically the better it is. Complex does not necessarily mean better.
So you've adopted this framework, this EOS, which is what? Entrepreneurial Operating System, correct? Okay.
Correct.
And you're supporting companies that you find have do they meet some sort of threshold when you meet with them and you discuss and you understand your problems? Is there some sort of threshold where you say, okay, this will help you? Or is it more of, regardless of the circumstances, this would be beneficial for you?
Yeah, so I would say it's somewhere in the middle. There's kind of six main components to the EOS model that we help companies strengthen, right? And typically what will happen is during our introductions when we're getting to know each other and learning, me learning about the company and them learning about EOS, typically within the first 90 minutes, it becomes pretty glaring where that pain really is, right? So there's not one particular test of like, well, because of this, then we need it. It's more, okay, how's this going, right? And I can tell you one of the biggest things we work around with is people. I would probably say the vast majority of clients we end up working with, solving their people issues, which there's a variety of those, tends to really be kind of the first thing. I think what's interesting to talk to you guys about, because it's something I've always been geared towards, the component that we work with that is normally the most often overlooked, though, is around process and documenting process. And for us, that means about, getting the most important stuff that you do. I don't care what it is you do, right? Whether if you develop software, or if you dig ditches, right? But whatever it is you do, getting the most important stuff you do done the right and best way every time.
Let's back up. Let's give a proper introduction to EOS. So tell everybody like exactly what is EOS, and maybe talk about the six components.
Sure. So, I'll just start from the high level. So at EOS, we work with leadership teams, business owners and their leadership teams, to help them get better at a high level, three things that we call vision, traction, and healthy, right? So we start with that. So vision is the sense of getting everybody 100% on the same page with where they're going and how they're going to get there. Traction is about instilling accountability and discipline so that wherever you go in your organization, people are executing on that shared vision. And then healthy is about making that team a cohesive, functional, dare I say, fun-loving team, because we know not all the time, but a lot of times in entrepreneurial organizations, the leadership team isn't. And so we know as goes the leadership team, so goes the rest of the organization, right? And so eventually that trickles down. You have everybody 100% on the same page with where they're going, rowing in the same direction, executing with accountability and discipline, and ultimately building a culture where like people actually enjoy spending time with each other, don't mind going to work. That's the highest level. And then, as I mentioned, what we work with when I go into a client is we focus on six components of their business and help them strengthen the six of those components. And so those six components, just real quickly, are vision, which again about getting everybody on the same page with where we're going. People, right? So making sure you have the right people in the right seats. Data, so really about making sure companies are making decisions for their organization based on objective information rather than thoughts, feelings, emotions, egos that will often drive decision making at smaller entrepreneurial organizations. Issues, right? So we spend a lot of time working on issues and not working on the issues themselves, but teaching, how to actually solve your issues. It's amazing how even really great teams can be really lousy at solving issues, like actually solving the issue at its root. There's a lot of over discussing, kicking the can down the road, and not really putting something down to bed. Process is the fifth component. So again, that's about really getting the most important stuff you do done the right and best way every time, right? I mean, that's critical for scalability, for consistency, ultimately for profitability. And then traction is the sixth component. And traction is really about taking that vision we mentioned and kind of pulling that down to the ground and executing day in and day out, right? To make sure you're actually in alignment achieving that vision.
So you are an EOS implementer. I mean, I think we can assume what that means, but exactly what does that mean in terms of how you engage?
I work directly with the leadership teams, and we basically have a schedule of full day sessions. They're kind of spaced out. We do a spaced learning approach, but I'll come in and meet with the team, and it's a little bit more frequent in the beginning, right? We do it about every couple of days over every 30 days we do a session, and that's to kind of learn some of these foundational tools. And then for the most part, we really just do kind of quarterly and annual check-ins, right? And so it's not an everyday kind of thing. It's really just about teaching you these tools, getting you to use these tools, and then I'm not there in perpetuity, right? I always say, I'm a teacher, a facilitator, and a coach. I'm not a consultant. which I think, and there's nothing wrong with consultants and very valuable, but that's just not what I do. And the reason that is, or what I like about that, is that it makes my work completely industry agnostic, which just makes it very fun for me, right? I mean, I told you, I
Okay.
learned about this working for a marketing analytic, consumer marketing analytics SaaS company. I took the knowledge I got there and then, implemented this as a drug and alcohol treatment company, right? I mean, very, very different
Okay.
things, but the principles ring true. And that's, you can go online and look at very quickly find a roster of companies and industries using this, and it's completely agnostic.
A curveball question for you, because I know I do call myself a consultant sometimes. I think there's probably an overlap to the skill set that you're describing, but I know for me, one of the core sort of skill sets that I learned was from a random job in my teens, and it was, of all the schooling and everything I had, what sort of helped me learn people and interact most was standing behind a counter at a camera shop.
Absolutely.
From that perspective, I'm curious, like you described this very robust set of experiences. Is there something like that stands out to you that it helps you when you do this work with companies that maybe people wouldn't think about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, not dissimilar from a camera shop. I mean, when I was in college, I worked at a bar and a restaurant. I did every single
Yeah.
front of house job. It started as being a bouncer, and it was not a very rough and tumble school. I mean, a guy like me could be a bouncer, pretty much checking IDs, but bouncer, barback, host, waiter, bartender, night manager, dishwasher doesn't show up, jump in behind the Hobart and wash some dishes. I think the experience people get from doing any type of retail service or food service really, really teaches you how to deal with people. I don't know if this is too much of a stretch now, or if you want me to get into this, or we can, as you mentioned, edit it. But another thing I'm very open about and believe firmly is I myself am in long-term recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. I've been sober for over 14 years. I'm very, very grateful for that. The experiences I had in the depths of my addiction obviously were formative towards some things. And as far removed from that as I am now, it's definitely given me perspective on a lot of things, which I'm very grateful for. I can have a really bad day. By today's standards, a really bad day isn't that bad compared to what some bad days were like a long time ago. But also through the recovery community, I've been very blessed to really kind of strengthen I don't know if it's a must, but strengthen my empathy for others. Right.
Okay.
And so that applies to everybody. I mean, that applies to business leaders, right? I truly believe everybody's out there just trying to do their best, and sometimes our approach to how we try to do our best can maybe be misguided or mismanaged. Insecurity and fear are very, very, very powerful things. They're very powerful influencers, right? To how we react, how we treat people, how we go about solving problems. And so I think my experiences I've had through the world of recovery have given me the ability to kind of meet people where they are, no matter what it might be, and just maybe help to take a breath and just be like, okay, like what are we ultimately trying to achieve here? And whatever you're doing, like that's okay, and let's just kind of be a little open and honest and vulnerable, right? So I guess that's the long way of getting to my willingness to be vulnerable. I try to bring to the table, right? Because I think if you can get others to be vulnerable, that creates trust, and that's really critical in making change, which is what's often needed, right? Uncomfortable change is often needed to kind of right some of the ships that we're trying to right, or fix some of the things that are a little misaligned.
Amazing. Josh, it comes right back to what you were saying. The humanity was your favorite part too.
Especially in our journey with, of course, with United Effects, our initial assumptions, I don't know if you feel differently, and it's how I try and live my life, is selling prevention and trying to convince folks that if you invest in this now at your stage, you will save yourself massive headaches. But then when you take that message and you go out there, you find out that it's not as appealing as selling a cure. We're constantly, pitch to pain, pitch to pain. We're like, well, what if we could pitch before there was pain? Like rationally, as much as that sounds like it makes sense, and we know that it's more helpful. we always find ourselves in positions where the audience does not want to do that. They want to wait until the pain hits a point where they're looking for a cure. And I know even they know that that's not what they want, but for some reason, humans, we just still do that. I'm assuming that with the work you're doing too, with companies, you find yourself, tell me if I'm wrong, Garth, you find yourself more often meeting folks when they're more in the looking for the cure stage.
Yeah, 100%. Some of what we do is try to almost, forecast or predict for people that future pain, because I think you hit the nail on the head. And I don't know if that's just something to do with the human condition. It's certainly been my case in multiple places in my life, right? Where like when the pain is great enough, then we make a change. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they're a growing company. A little bit on the smaller end of what I do, and they're in the professional legal services, and they're growing. We were talking about EOS, and we hear this all the time. I think I need to hire more. I need to hire the right people first, and then we'll go ahead and move forward with this. And it's like, well, what system are you using to make sure you hire the right people? Because that's part of what I'm bringing to the table, right? Would you rather think you got the right people, then put in a system that kind of tells you like, I think we got the wrong people, or let's put the system in first and use that system to actually get those right people, right? So to predict that pain, like you were talking about, like, yes, you might not need all these seats right now, but at your trajectory, if you start achieving the goals that you're laying out for yourself, you're going to need these people, or you're going to need these processes, or whatever it is. And let's, penny wise, pound foolish, right? Or was it ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure? I think that's the one I was looking for. Knew it had something to do with pounds. But I think that's kind of what you're saying about. I don't know why that is so common, but I definitely agree with you that we see it all the time.
Let's come back to the chasm for a second, and then I'm curious about your perspective on the intersection with your work as an EOS. So I guess the first question is, do you feel like you understand what we mean by the hidden chasm? In your own words, do you feel like you've seen the hidden chasm in these companies that you're working with or in the past?
I don't want to cast shade on anybody, but I've seen it with clients, when I worked at other technology companies. It's funny, you guys are talking about this hidden chasm, and we talk a lot about a concept called hitting the ceiling. Patrick Lencioni, hitting the ceiling, which I think there's some similarities to it, right? Where I think in both cases, there's some kind of revolution is required to move beyond that, right? The idea that just your current trajectory is going to be halted, right, no matter what, and you need to take action of some type to spark a revolution that's going to get you either through the ceiling, or in your guys' thing, over that chasm.
Yeah, same sort of breakthrough concept. And I think in our experience and what we've seen is that it tends to sneak up on them. And is that sort of what you see, is that by the time they've called you, is it preventative, or is it and I guess this is what we were just chatting about, but like, is it more like, we're not sure what happened, help? Is that sort of the room you tend to walk into?
Yeah, definitely. I would love to, and part of what I try to do in the other 830 EOS implementers globally, we just try to really spread knowledge about EOS, right? Just as much as possible, just evangelize it. There's a very significant community of people that even self-implement EOS. There's tools out there, information. We're very abundance-minded. We just want people to know about this because of what you said, right? This is so much easier if you can get out in front of it.
Sure.
But most of the time, people ask me, we have these conversations all the time. What's your one sentence for what you do, right? Because for me to go and explain the whole model and everything. So, my one sentence is, I help business owners take vacation without looking at their cell phone. Like,
first of all, I love that. Second of all, I wish I'd thought of that question.
Right. So I mean, but that's what I do. Now, here's the thing. A business owner doesn't understand the value of taking vacation without looking at their cell phone,
right,
until they've taken multiple vacations where they're living on their cell phones.
Right.
It's one of those things where you almost have to experience the bad to appreciate the good. And that might even to what Josh brought up, right? Is there, you need the existence of that negative to fully appreciate what that good is.
Yeah. Is there a size company that you tend to work with? Are there any limits?
There's no limits. My sweet spot is companies about 10 to 250 employees, right? So our
Okay.
typically privately held. Really, as I mentioned before, it's about companies that are willing to be honest and vulnerable with themselves and the people they work with. Got to be really growth oriented, entrepreneurial in spirit. It can work in the nonprofit world. That's not really target. I would say the nonprofit situation can work if the leadership team at that organization is able to kind of function autonomously. If you have a situation where you need board approval to change the toner cartridge in the printer, it doesn't really work. The other main thing around the EOS is it's not really great for startups per se, and that's because the tools in EOS are really about execution. And so, I've worked at companies very, very early stages where what we're doing today is
Hmm.
completely different 6 months from now, right? So we come to the table with the assumption of you're in the right market and you have the right product or service. Now, I understand, of course, products evolve and there are shifts and things like that. But if one day we're making apple pie and the next day we're doing batting cage construction, it's hard to really to put this system in place because it's not a seminar. It's not a one day thing. It's something that you work into the entire culture of your company.
What are some early warning signs that either from your perspective for the chasm, or that maybe somebody should be considering a system like EOS as a result of? You mentioned data. I imagine that there are KPIs but also just cultural feelings that could potentially be red flags that if a CEO is listening to this, they maybe should listen to and go, huh, maybe I need to think about this a little bit. In your experience, what do you think some of those would be?
Sure. So I'll give you two kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. So we'll take data first. We're
Sure.
obviously it's crazy the amount of data we have now when you think to even what, our parents had with, my dad was in advertising sales and mom is in healthcare as a nurse. And so there's some data there, but just the amount of data that we have right now is overwhelming. And one thing we really focus on is, whatever gets measured gets managed. And so are we being sure that we're looking at the right data, right? Because I think we can all be subject to confirmation bias that,
Sure.
I can say, well, here's my four numbers to look at from, that I'm responsible for in the weekly performance. And my four numbers, these are great. I'm doing fantastic. Are those the right four numbers? And that's something we spend a lot of time with the whole leadership team, right? Identifying what are those numbers. And so, it's not just about getting data because you guys would know more than me. Like, I can get you all the data in the world, but if it's not meaningful, if I can't really understand how this is actually affecting my company and my people, what good is it serving?
Sure.
On the other end of the spectrum, we talk about the people component, and we talk about different problems, different types of people problems you can have. And there's one that we talk about a lot. We call wrong person, right seat. And the idea behind wrong person, right seat is they're in the right seat means they're really good at their job, right? So
Hmm.
they're great at their job, but they're the wrong person for the company, and they don't fit culturally. And I think that gets overlooked a ton, right? Because especially with tough labor markets, when you have somebody, and depending on the type of position, it's easy to say sales, right? Like you have a great salesperson, they're hitting all their numbers, right? But if that person, when they walk into the office, if 70% of the people in the office roll their eyes, they can't stand the person isn't a team player, and they're not showing up to company, whatever it might look like. It's harder to solidify what that negative impact is on your culture, right? But when somebody's eating away at the culture of your company like a cancer from the inside, that's something we don't have hard data for necessarily. But just because we don't have that data doesn't mean that's not a very significant impact. And so somebody who's bringing in great business and doing their job, but is lowering the morale of 60-70% of the people in your business, that's something we really help people. We have tools that help companies kind of measure that, or at least identify that. And then whether if that's something that can be corrected, or if it's the type of thing where sometimes, we'll encourage a client to make a really difficult change, where it's like, listen, I understand it's hard to get rid of this person, but you don't see it because you're just looking at like a revenue number, but I assure you they're doing more harm than good for your company.
How do companies end up in that situation? Is it, maybe it's just part of the normal growth curve? I don't know. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, I think it's part of the normal growth curve. And I think, when you find somebody with the skill set to do their job really, really well, that's very attractive. That's very exciting, right? Because that's typically what we often think we struggle with, right? Anybody that's gone through the hiring process, right? And to just find somebody. So you finally find somebody, because that culture component, that can be, without the right tools, that can be even harder to identify during the hiring process than their actual skill set or expertise at doing their job. And also, nobody likes to be wrong, right? So I hire a person and they're really good at their job. I definitely don't want to be wrong about the fact that they're terrible for the culture of our company. So I can very easily fall back on, no. It's everybody else is the problem, right? It's not this one individual. It's the other 13 people are the problem, right? Because this one individual I hired is hitting all their numbers, right? Or is doing their trade or their service very, very well. And especially if you start to get into more selective roles where that skill set is even harder to find. I know there's organizations I've been at where, I've lived that situation of having what I would deem a wrong person in the right seat, and the more specialized that person is, or the more qualified they are at the actual skill set for that job, the harder it is to make that change.
It's also interesting, I've noticed, is that the more senior that person is, the more forgiving you are of their output as well.
Yes.
That's a bigger mistake to have to admit to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've seen that a lot too.
Interesting.
There was a phrase used in the past, the 10Xer, who comes in and is the genius, and they get a pass for so much. They get forgiven by laterally or above for behavior that could be considered toxic, only because they're the 10Xer. Lack of accountability for the impact that their character has on the productivity of everyone around them is overlooked. And yes, you're right. The data, it's hard to quantify. It's easy for everyone down there feeling it, but it's hard to quantify that the right. losses that are incurring around this person are related to them directly, that they have a significant part that they play in the problems that are around them based on their behavior. And yeah, those dynamics, it's like, how do you quantify those dynamics in a way that is as important to a business as the revenue numbers? I don't know.
Yeah. It's, it's something we talk a lot about too, about spreading that openness and honesty throughout the entire organization, and you really have to, we really believe in transparency, being very transparent with your entire organization, from the leadership team down, like, what is our vision? What are our goals? What are our values? Are you having this conversation with people? Like, how many executives know, or if you ask the average executive, and I don't have a number for this, but I'm just throwing this out as something to think about, what percentage of your employees do you think have the Sunday scaries? Right? Like, what percent of the people working for you on Sunday night are filled with some angst, right? A little bit or a lot, but to have that term Sunday scared, I've definitely worked in jobs where I've had that, right?
Yeah.
And again, going back to that, you sometimes don't appreciate the good until you have the bad. It wasn't until I'd had jobs where I was, biting my nails and tossing and turning Sunday night, until I realized, when I found myself and put myself in a position where I don't have that Sunday night scaries, I'm like, wow, this is amazing, But I think if you ask the average executive, at least any that I want to work with, do you want your people to have anxiety Sunday night? Is that what you're trying to build? Because, our companies have a mission, and they have a purpose, whatever that is, right? We're providing a good or a service, but at the same time, in building that company, we are building a community, right? At the end of the day, like, we have a group of people that are spending a considerable amount of time together, either physically or now, hybrid, virtual, but people are spending their time together. And so what type of community do you really want to be building, right? You're just as responsible for that as you are for the outcome of your company. And maybe I'm a little too, star and glitter in the eyes when I think about that, but at least for me and what I want to do and the types of people I want to work with, that's when we talked about that high level of EOS, that healthy component, right?
Yeah.
Like it's short. We're all here for a very short period of time, right? 100 years, like at best. You know what I mean? Like it's a blink of an eye. We're all here together, right? Like there's been billions of people on this planet, and the small group we got here, we're all here together at the same little, microsecond together. It just seems too short to really spend it being unhappy, And if I can do something to help the people around me, just enjoy their 8 hours that they're spending with me a day a little bit more, like I think that's worthwhile.
I love that. I also think my instinct is that, to your point, a community or an organization that enables that troubling individual, the 10Xer, as Josh put it, there's a bigger problem there anyway. It's not just that this one resource has come in who's doing this amazing output that nobody else is doing, and but they don't fit culturally. It's that, what is it about this situation that nobody else can do the same output?
Right.
Like, why is there a hero here?
Right.
And Josh and I talk a lot about hero culture and organizations that enable and grow heroes, and that it's really bad for everybody, right? It's bad for the organization, because all of a sudden you have these individuals who, by the way, aren't necessarily heroes, aren't always bad cultural fits. Some people can be amazing culture fits and they're still in this situation.
Sure.
But all of the knowledge is in one person. Nobody else is keeping up. They're not really sure what's going on. And that one person can very easily burn out. And when they eventually decide they need to go, or if they are a bad culture fit and everybody realizes they need to go, a whole chunk of the company's productivity goes with them. So there's a bigger problem here.
100%. And we even see it. We see it a lot of time with owners, right? At least in the EOS world. So a lot of the people that I have conversations with, around talking about mutual clients are exit planners, right? So, if you look at that company size, I'm talking about 10 to 250 employees, a lot of times, the owner, right, the person who started that, they're a person of some financial means, but in a lot of cases, their company is their most valuable asset, right? And there's this idea of, well, I'm going to hit a certain age and I'm going to sell the company, and I know that it's worth this much money, and then that's how I'm going to creep into my retirement. And what they don't realize is without them, the company it's worth a fraction of that. And so we have these people that have these very skewed valuations in their head of what their company is worth, because so much of it is tied up with them. And that's not in a malicious way, and that's not a bad culture type thing. But that's again where you're getting to. The bigger problem there is, okay, how do we get that knowledge out of your head, and we actually get that worked into the company itself, right? Into the design of the company, the designs of the seats, the types of rules we have here, and then we can educate the right people on those rules and functions.
So you guys actually work on that in your session, the idea of allowing, well, I guess you sort of hinted at this, the idea that the leader executives can take a vacation means that they're training others to actually run the business on their own. You're turning it into an engine. Am I getting that right?
100%. So I have to give a little bit of credit. My friend Matt is the CEO of a great construction consulting company. And he implemented EOS with another implementer, not me, with an amazing woman, Maria, here in the Philadelphia area. And I think he was about 2.5 years into EOS implementation. Matt took his family on a vacation. They did like a 3 or 4 week vacation to Europe this summer. And it was really kind of the first test of like, Matt's leaving the country, right, for the better part of a month. And Matt has a teenage son. And as teenage sons are apt to do, I think on the second day of vacation, Matt's teenage son dropped Matt's cell phone in the Red Sea. And so this is how I stole the story to make it my own, right? Matt didn't buy a new cell phone until he got home. Amazing. So for the remainder of that vacation, now he said, it's not like he was completely unplugged. He had a laptop and he would check emails some at night and whatnot. Like, we have to be a little bit realistic. But that's exactly what happened with Matt's company. And now he was able to, start to remove himself as the CEO or as the visionary of that company. Those are words we use a lot more. We use visionary and integrator when we talk about the top of the org chart.
Thinking about like culture and underlying beliefs, what do you feel are the ones that lead to these situations where being a single point of failure is desired, incentivized, rewarded in an organization? where you have to, I'm assuming the way you undo that involves having to work them through a different way of thinking as well, or challenge surface underlying core beliefs about themselves in relation to the business that is engendering this need to be a single point of failure.
Sure. So I think what lends to a lot of that mentality of people trying to be heroes sometimes is a lack of definition of accountability throughout an organization, right?
Okay.
So, and this might not be what you're asking me, and if it's not, let me know. But as an example, a long time ago in my career, I was in a technology company, and I was in the customer success team, and there was a culture where if a client sent an email, right, at 10:30 at night or 11 o'clock at night, it was almost a race amongst our internal team, right, of the 3 or 4 people who got that email, of like who's going to respond first, right? Who is more proactive and going to, right? Who's going to respond at 11:15 at night and not 7 a.m. or not 8:30 a.m. And because when an email got sent to a team, right, and there were different levels of people on this, I don't think it was very clearly defined of, okay, here's the person who is accountable and responsible for communication with the client, right? Or here's who's responsible and accountable for doing, even if we would say like after hours communication with the client. And so, it was almost like a scarcity mindset of like, well, I better be the first one to respond because who knows who's looking, or whether if it's the client sees that I'm the first to respond, or if somebody in management comes to find that I'm the first one to respond. And so I think more when you have very clear defined roles and accountability, right? So we're a big proponent of EOS. We always say, if 2 people are accountable for something, nobody's accountable for it.
Mm-hmm.
So part of what we do, and one of the tools we use is called the accountability chart, which is kind of it's like an org chart on steroids almost. But what we do more so within that is we actually define the 5 roles, ROLES. That's, my wife gives me a hard time about my Western PA accent. So not RULES, but ROLES roles, for every single seat in the organization, right? So that you clearly know who's responsible for what. And then if I'm responsible for it, then I can trust myself to know the best way to handle or react to that. There's not this culture bred where I have to go outside of what might be appropriate or what might be the norm because I'm afraid of some kind of unforeseen competition within my own team.
I think from what you've described, I can see how EOS can be extremely beneficial to an organization, but it's not a one size fits all sort of tool, right? It doesn't like just solve all your problems.
Right.
It's probably worth asking, what doesn't it actually address that you might point at in an organization and go, let's get you connected with some people that can fix that as well.
Right. So, I mean, that's a great question. I want to think how to make sure I say this properly because, that's where this coming is like of being a coach, right? And so a lot of what it does address is helping you identify those gaps or things that are missing, but it doesn't actually fix those gaps, right? Okay. So, like to go back to that accountability chart, a lot of times we'll start diving into that and we'll find a lot of empty seats in your organization.
Interesting.
Right. And so it's people you don't have, and then we'll often find extra seats too, unfortunately. Right. So we have 6 people here doing this. It shouldn't be. We're not a technology company, right? We are a technology enabled coaching company, right? You can use software to run EOS. You can use literally pen and paper, right? You can keep all the tools, but you can keep it all on paper. Not really my forte, right? But you can do that. But we don't offer, any type of financial or accounting advice, right? Like that's not what we do. We can help you realize that you don't have a good grasp on your financial, picture and what it looks like, and maybe help you realize, okay, do we need to hire a CFO? Do we need to hire a fractional CFO, right? A lot of people in our world end up, hiring fractional executives, especially if you're on the smaller size company. Getting started, it can be intimidating to be like, well, we have to go hire a COO, we have to hire a CFO, we have to hire a CMO. Like, we don't have that kind of money laying around. And so we can help identify gaps that maybe there's a fractional solution to it. So we work with a lot of partners like that as well. The same thing with sales. We don't provide any type of sales training, right? We're not going to teach you how to become a great salesperson, but if we realize that there's gaps in our sales process, we can help, steer you or help you identify partners that can help you get better with that. Same with technology. We're not telling you what to do with your tech stack, but if we realize there's a gaping hole in it, we know professionals that can help steer you in the right direction.
The underlying theory then behind it is that there is a framework for business that, not that one is better than all of them, but that allows a business to thrive agnostic of what that business may deliver and the specific needs of that. And if you understand that framework, you can fill in the missing pieces and begin building it so that the output is where you want it to be.
100%. And that's, when I talked about those 6 key components, we focus on getting each one of those components to what we call 100% strong, right? So we have some tools where we can kind of measure what your strength is in each of those components, knowing that, 100% strong that's utopia. It's perfection. Nobody ever,
Okay.
right?
My next question.
But right. Yeah. So that's never going to happen. Right. But it's that idea of, kind of, aim for the stars. And if you miss, you land on the moon. It's still pretty good type thing,
I like to call it North Star. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
On the data end of the work you do, what are some of the most common vanity metrics you see that you have to work organizations through just to undo their value in them and their care for them?
Right. A lot of it is the numbers that we try to look at are forward facing numbers. And I think a lot of people,
like leading and lagging.
Yes, exactly. Right. So making sure we're really looking at leading numbers. The way we set up our teams with their meeting pulse and the frequency with how they meet. So that's a big part of what we do too, is we have a structured agendas for leadership team meetings to actually make those meetings very productive and worthwhile and shorter than what they tend to be. And in that meeting is where a lot of these numbers are reviewed, right? And so, this is kind of a softball one, but a great example would be, website uptime, right? To go to an IT thing. On a weekly basis, check in on what our website uptime was. It has to be 99 with 4 trailing zeros. And it's like, we don't need to report on this at our weekly leadership team meeting, because if our website's down, I'm going to know about it, right, within much sooner time than Wednesday at 11 o'clock in the morning, right?
Sure.
And like, don't be patting yourself on the back that the website's always up. Like, it's supposed to be up. You know what I mean?
I like that.
Like, let's not pat ourselves on the back too much. We're just kind of doing our job, kind of the table stakes type stuff. So I would say a lot of times we see people, they have kind of table stakes numbers in there being like, well, no, look, I'm doing great. It's like, well, that's kind of baseline. Like that should be where it's at. The numbers that we look at oftentimes will just alert you that an investigation is needed, right? So they won't necessarily tell you what is wrong, but it's really about, because we believe in a very quick pulse, right? So like we build a scorecard for leadership teams, and the analogy for that would be, as we'd say, Bo, let's say you're, chief executive of your company, and you're on vacation, you're on a little deserted island, and you pick the one that has no Wi-Fi and it has no cell phone coverage.
Sounds nice.
Right? And so the young man or young woman brings over a tray with your frosty beverage on it and hands you a sheet of paper. And that sheet of paper just has, a column of numbers. What numbers do you want to look at right now that instantly you have a pulse on what's going on with your business? Right? That's the only information you get. That's the numbers we help drive people towards. And so if something's off, I don't necessarily know what's wrong, but it leads me to, okay, we need to investigate this. Is there actually a problem? Is there an actual pattern? And a big part of what we do too is looking at a trailing history of numbers. So maybe not necessarily just what's the number this week, but what's it this week? What was it last week? What do the past 13 weeks look like? Was there an anomaly or is there a pattern?
So When you're thinking about companies in the chasm that like we've described, that maybe are realizing there's a problem, maybe it is the hero piece that you were talking about or other elements like that. Maybe it's some more what we've been chatting about with those leadership issues leading to strategic gaps and the wrong people or the right people in the wrong seats or vice versa. And tech debt, and they're lagging, their competition is gaining on them. In that scenario, if there's one thing that you could advise the CEO to start doing, what would you point to and say, get started on that, and we'll talk soon. Take 2 of these and call me in the morning.
Right. So, because it kind of spans the whole spectrum of it. The very tactical thing that I do for folks. So you can see above me, there's the book Traction. Traction was written by Gino Wickman. Gino is the creator of EOS. And so the whole system is kind of laid out in there. But what I often tell people is just read the first chapter, right? The first chapter, in fact, you can go to the EOS Worldwide website. You can download that first chapter for free. It's 9 pages, and there's like a 20 question checklist that kind of runs the gamut around all 6 of those 6 components. And that really kind of will, I tell people, read those 9 pages. And if anything that resonates, give me a call and we'll just have another conversation about it. But for, that one executive, and this is just me, that I truly, truly embrace, even outside of EOS, outside of business. I have trusted advisors in my life, right? Whether it be my wife, a couple of very close friends from the recovery community, some business mentors, right? And I'm a firm believer that a problem shared is a problem halved, right? And so probably the worst thing somebody can do is just continue to just sit and think on it, and not take any action. And whether that be reach out to a professional, right? Somebody like me, like an EOS implementer, or, just your buddy, just somebody you can trust to say, here's what I'm dealing with. Because I know I myself, there's something magical, and I'm going to get a little fluffy here. There's something magical in saying stuff out loud. I'm a very big proponent of. Now, I'm a big proponent of journaling. Like, from a personal thing, I love to journal. But when I'm dealing with something hard, there's something great about just saying it out loud, hearing myself say what my problem is. Sometimes that even works, saying it to the voicemail box of a friend, calling up a friend, dumping whatever problem I have. And when I just hear myself say it out loud, it changes it, right? It makes it a little less scary and a little bit more like, okay, well, if I have a problem, then there is a solution to it. And so by getting with people, again, whoever that might be, for an executive, it could be somebody else on their leadership team, right? You don't have to go outside of the company. It's that trusted person you trust that you can just kind of go to with that vulnerability we've talked about and say, here's a problem I'm dealing with. And that's something we really work on a grander scale within EOS, but I think anybody can practice doing that without any type of formal training, right? Of just getting in the habit of just finding one person and sharing what that problem or that fear is, to help move towards a solution.
I love that.
One leading indicator to the problems for which EOS can help remedy is being isolated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is probably pretty common for executives.
I mean, nobody wants to admit they're wrong, right? I mean, There's been a lot of talk, and it's funny. It's come up in my world this past week, some different podcasts I've listened to, but the phrase imposter syndrome, and like, as my career elevated, I kept waiting for that to go away, and it doesn't, there are people much higher above me that I'm sure have that. And that same mentality, right, of being able to say, like, maybe not to this extent, but I definitely have some buddies I can call up and be like, dude, I feel like a complete fraud. They're going to figure me out any second now, and that's not the truth, right? Because feelings aren't facts. And I've become very aware of that for myself, right? My feelings that in the moment, I mean, heck, half the time my imposter syndrome is cured with a ham sandwich. Like, I'm not inadequate. I was just hungry. You know what I mean? Like, I just need to go eat something. And all of a sudden, like, oh, wait, no, the world isn't ending. I just, skipped breakfast. but having that friend that I can go to, or that other person on my team, and just admit that little insecurity, or I guess admitting that I see a problem, and removing thinking that I think of the problem. I think an issue we run into is when I identify an issue, my insecurity will flare up, but I think that issue or that problem is a direct reflection on me, my abilities, or my skill set. And I think executives feel that a lot of times, right? That like there's a problem at the company and that must be a direct reflection on me. And sometimes it might be, but not always. But you're not going to move in the direction of solving that problem by continuing to just keep it to yourself. And that fear and that insecurity, my experience has been, is that will just continue to build the longer I keep that to myself. To Josh's point, the longer I stay in that isolation.
I think it's putting that together. Change your perspective. Ask for help. Grab a sandwich.
Right. When I change the way I look at things, the things I look at change. Right. I had a mentor that always said, whatever I focus on gets bigger. If I focus on the problem, it gets bigger. If I focus on the solution, it gets bigger. Talk to somebody. Right. That'll help you start focusing on the solution.
So as we're kind of getting to the end of this, I wanted to take a couple minutes. I know that you're very involved with several nonprofits and as a volunteer. If you'd like to tell us about them and tell the world about them, go ahead.
I would love to. There's two in particular that are near and dear to my heart. The first is the Ronald McDonald House Charities. I'm very partial to the Ronald McDonald House Charities of the greater Philadelphia region. The Ronald McDonald House, for those that don't know, and I'll try and be quick, the Ronald McDonald House Charities were set up as a way to provide housing for families and children, basically very sick kids that need extensive medical care. And, Go Birds, it was actually started, they just celebrated their 50th anniversary. The Philadelphia Ronald McDonald House was the first one. They just celebrated their 50th anniversary. And it was actually created in conjunction with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Eagles. Most people don't know that, but the short story is there was a member for the Eagles who had a very sick child. They were spending a lot of time at Children's Hospital, and they were seeing these families literally kind of living in the waiting rooms and eating out of the vending machines, right? Because they were from far away and they had nowhere to stay. And so the Eagles, in conjunction with the hospital, they helped, and McDonald's got behind it, and they formed this house where families that live more than 25 or 35 miles from the hospital can come and stay for very minimal cost or no cost at all. About 14 years ago, I was in between jobs. As I mentioned, it was right when I was in early recovery. And I had a mentor who told me I had to get out of the house one day a week and help people to remind myself I didn't have any real problems. I'm like learning to get over a drug and alcohol addiction. I'm unemployed. And he's like, yeah, you need to get out of the house to realize you don't have any real problems. And so that's what started my journey with Ronald McDonald House. And I mean, just the work they're doing is unbelievable, right? Unbelievable. I've met people from all over the world. And if you want to see vulnerability, but if you really want to see strength and courage, go spend some time with the people that are coming in and out of that house. It's tremendous what they're doing. Second organization I'd love to just mention real quick is, again, it's an international organization called Achilles International. Me and a group of other people, we founded a Philadelphia chapter, probably 12 or 13 years ago, called Philly Achilles. So you can find them on phillyachilles.com. And Achilles' mission is to help disabled athletes participate in physical activities, sports, and races. So most of our athletes, a lot of it is centered around running. So I've spent a lot of time being a guide runner. Most of our athletes are their disability is visual. So guide running for blind runners. Again, just another amazing experience when we talk about shifting perspective, right? And go run a half marathon or a marathon with somebody who's blind, and you hold a rope and they hold another end of the rope, and you have to describe every single nook and cranny and pothole and crack and turn. But again, just to give that perspective of there's people out there that can't even go for a run, without the assistance of somebody else. And again, those people, when I've encountered them in my life, the hope, the courage, and the laughter that I've gotten from them is amazing. So Philly Achilles and Philadelphia Ronald McDonald House, both really near and dear to my heart. A lot of great people there.
Absolutely amazing. Garth, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much
Thank you
for taking the time with us. how can people get in touch with you, either to learn more about the volunteer work or to learn more about EOS and tap into that big brain of yours?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, probably email would be easiest. Garth.Reid, R-E-I-D, at eosworldwide.com. I assume there's probably somewhere in the podcast you could put that, or label that or something. But Garth.Reid at eosworldwide.com, or my website is eosworldwide.com/Garth-Reid. You can find me there, and there's contact information.
And we'll be tagging Garth in LinkedIn as well.
Yes. Yeah, LinkedIn's great. Go walk around the trails of the Wissahick and you'll find me running around in there somewhere and getting a little trail running in slowly. I'm around.
Awesome. Well, this has been another just amazing episode of The Hidden Chasm. Thanks for joining us, and tune in next time.
Great.
Yeah. Definitely.
Thanks so much, guys. Really had a good time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Hidden Chasm. If you'd like to share your story, or if you have any questions, you can reach us via email at podcast@unitedeffects.com or by visiting thehiddenchasm.com.